Why did every trained sniper on that field just stop breathing? The air itself seemed to pause, that thin mountain wind cutting across Copper Ridge, carrying the faint metallic scent of gunpowder and disbelief. Range officers stood frozen, spotting scopes still raised, eyes flicking from the bullet-pocked target to the woman lowering the rifle. 150 consecutive hits. Every shot perfect. Every shot impossible. Even the sun looked stunned, hanging low behind Montana's ridgeline, pouring a molten glow over the spent brass glittering at her feet. She set the borrowed rifle down slowly, the gesture deliberate, her calloused hands steady despite the tremor that ran through the crowd. Someone whispered, almost reverent, "Who the hell is she?" The woman didn't answer. She just exhaled, long and quiet, as if releasing a lifetime of restraint. The rifle, Army issue, with a misaligned scope and a history of missed shots, lay across the shooting mat like it belonged to her. She wasn't Army, not anymore. 3 hours earlier, she'd been organizing brake rotors at an auto parts store in Ridgefield, the kind of job where your body worked, but your mind stayed somewhere else. She'd worn the same red polo shirt she wore every day. Her name tag had been crooked, and no one there knew she once held the title Distinguished Expert Marksman, or that she'd left the service under circumstances nobody dared mention. Her name was Maya Hartwell. 38. Mechanics clerk. Former Army Reserve sniper. And whatever had brought her back behind that trigger, after 8 years of silence, had started months before, in a quiet store filled with motor oil and fluorescent light. 3 months earlier, Ridgefield, Montana had still been clinging to late September heat. Inside Callahan's Auto Parts, that heat sat heavy, a dry, mechanical warmth that mingled with the smell of grease and old tires. Rows of shelves gleamed under buzzing lights, stocked with spark plugs, brake pads, hydraulic fluid. Nothing about it felt dramatic, but for Maya every aisle had its own logic. Every shelf was order, predictable, safe. She knelt in aisle 7, rebuilding a brake pad display a customer had destroyed while just looking. Her motions were exact, small, efficient, automatic. The kind of control that belonged to someone who'd learned to keep chaos out by controlling everything within reach. A voice broke the rhythm. "Excuse me, ma'am. You got torque specs for Picatinny rail mounting systems?" Maya turned and froze. 3 soldiers stood there in fatigues, their posture impossible to mistake. The lead one had sergeant stripes, early 30s, steady eyes, the kind that measured people without meaning to. His name tape read Brooks. He didn't seem like the arrogant type. Just a soldier asking for help, in a place that smelled of oil and work. "Picatinny rails are NATO standardized," Maya replied without hesitation. "If you're getting torque issues, it's probably not the rail. Either your mount surface preps off, or your fasteners aren't engaging evenly." The corporal beside him raised a brow, impressed. "We're mounting optics, getting scope shift after transport, even with manufacturer specs." Maya's mind clicked into motion, that old problem-solving cadence she hadn't used in years. Manufacturer specs assume lab conditions. You're driving those rifles through vibration frequencies no one tests for. Tighten too hard, you transfer harmonics straight into the optic housing. She moved to the shelf, pulling down lock washers and vibration-dampening hardware, explaining torque, compression, and harmonic balance with the casual fluency of someone who didn't need to think, someone who knew. The soldiers exchanged glances, and Sergeant Brooks finally asked the question she hated most. "How do you know so much about precision rifle mounts?" That question always landed like a tripwire. Maya's voice went smaller. "I read a lot." And that was it. The door slammed shut. The youngest soldier, Specialist Williams, mumbled something about operator error. Brooks frowned. "Our code thinks if the scopes shift, it's our fault. Says it, operator inconsistency." Maya's answer came before she could stop it. He's wrong. The word carried a quiet finality that silenced them all. She laid the parts on the counter, showing how isolation mounts worked, how star pattern torque equalized pressure, how to trust feel over instruction manuals. Brooks studied her with new curiosity, the kind that could be dangerous if she let it. When they left, he paused by the door. Didn't catch your name. Maya, she said, Maya Hartwell. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his composure. Thanks, Maya, you just saved us a headache. As the door closed behind them, the silence came roaring back. Only the buzz of fluorescent lights filled the air, and the faint echo of that name she hadn't heard spoken by soldiers in almost a decade. Later that afternoon, the bell over the door rang again. Reverend Samuel Grant entered, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his expression tight. He looked like a man balancing hope and dread in the same breath. Maya, he said, you got a minute. She led him to the quiet corner by the register where the shelves muffled conversation. The Reverend's hands fidgeted with a folded letter. It's about St. Joseph's Veterans Center. The inspection came back worse than we feared. Roof, HVAC, foundation, it's all failing. How bad? She asked. 75,000 minimum, and if it's not fixed in 4 months, the county shuts us down. Maya's jaw tightened. St. Joseph's wasn't just a building. It was where her mother, Alina, went for therapy 3 afternoons a week. It was where the old Korean War vets shared stories and loneliness, where soldiers with PTSD found the only people who'd listen. Reverend Grant continued, Fort Bridger's sniper team's doing a shooting exhibition. Fundraiser in 3 weeks. If we can get 400 people, we might raise half. Half? It wasn't enough, not even close. But it was something. I'll help however I can, Maya said quietly. Set up logistics, whatever you need. The Reverend smiled with the kind of gratitude that breaks your heart. You already do more than enough. Your mom talks about you all the time, says you gave up your own life to take care of her. Maya didn't answer. She'd never liked being called selfless. Selfless meant empty, and she already felt hollow enough. That night at the small yellow house on Pinewood Avenue, Maya cooked dinner beside her mother. Alina's hands trembled slightly as she chopped vegetables. The Parkinson was worsening, but she smiled, that same patient, luminous smile that had carried Maya through every storm. They're saying St. Joseph's might close, Alina murmured. Where would we even go? We'll figure it out, Maya said. They're doing a fundraiser, I'll help. Alina nodded slowly. You always do. And for a while they just cooked, quietly, together. But when the dishes were done, and the house fell into its nightly stillness, Maya sat alone in her small bedroom, staring at 3 objects she never touched. A bronze marksmanship medal, a framed certificate reading, Distinguished Expert, and a photo, her in uniform, 28 years old, smiling beside an M24 rifle. The woman in the picture looked fearless, certain. That certainty was gone now, buried under 8 years of surviving instead of living. She once believed skill and integrity were enough. Then a man named Marcus Webb taught her what power does to truth. Webb, now Lieutenant Colonel Webb, had buried her career when she refused to sign off on his fraudulent procurement files. He'd erased her future with paperwork, whispers, and silence. And silence had become her refuge. Until now. She lay on her back, eyes tracing the ceiling cracks like constellations. Her hands that hadn't touched a rifle since the day she was discharged, flexed unconsciously, remembering a weight they'd sworn never to carry again. Sleep came late. When it did, it brought a dream. Endless targets glimmering in mountain fog, each one falling cleanly as her heart found the rhythm between beats. And in the dream, Webb stood at the horizon, expression unreadable. When Maya woke, her pulse was racing, her palms damp, the phantom recoil still echoing through her arms. She hadn't touched a rifle in 8 years, but her body hadn't forgotten, not really. Some things lived in the blood, not memory. The next morning at Callahan's, the door chimed early. Sergeant Brooks walked in, not in uniform this time. Civilian clothes, a cup of coffee in each hand, and a look that said this visit wasn't about torque specs. "Mornin'," he said, offering one cup. "Wasn't sure how you take it, so I brought options." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You drove 40 miles at 7 a.m. for coffee." "40 miles for a question," he said. They stepped aside to a quieter aisle, surrounded by filters and motor oil. Brooks's voice dropped low. "I looked you up last night. Army Reserve, competitive marksman, top of your class, sealed discharge files." Maya's stomach dropped. "That was a long time ago." "Maybe, but I also found out who your co was. Major Marcus Webb. He's at Fort Bridger now." Her throat tightened. Brooks continued, careful, deliberate. "The same equipment problems you diagnosed yesterday, those came from his contracts. He signed off on that scope system. Same manufacturer, same shortcuts." He let that sink in before saying, "We're planning a shooting demonstration for the fundraiser. If the gear fails, and it will, we'll be blamed. Webb's corruption stays hidden. The fundraiser collapses." Maya didn't speak. "So I'm asking," he said quietly. "You've seen this before. You know how to compensate. If you were to shoot publicly and prove that it's not operator error, it could expose everything." She stared at him, stunned. "You want me to compete against your sniper team with the same broken gear?" "Exactly," Brooks said. "If you can hit targets they can't, the failure can't be blamed on soldiers. It exposes the system." "That's insane," she said. "I haven't shot in years." "Then you've got 3 weeks to remember who you are." The silence between them felt heavy enough to crack the air. Maya thought of her mother, of the veterans who'd lose their sanctuary. She thought of the way Webb had stolen her voice, and of how silence, once protective, had become suffocating. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Brooks nodded, slipping her a card. "Call me by tomorrow. If not, I'll assume it's a no." When he left, the bell chimed again, that same harmless sound that now felt like a ticking clock. She stood there, card in hand, the weight of a decision pressing on her chest. Her heart beat once hard, then again. Then she whispered to the empty store, "8 years is long enough." That night she called. When Brooks answered, her voice was calm, steady, certain in a way she hadn't felt in years. "I'll do it." And somewhere out past the mountains, the space between heartbeats opened again, waiting for her to find it. What if she'd made a mistake? That was the thought that stalked her as dawn painted the Bitterroot Mountains in quiet gold. Maya drove toward Copper Ridge with the kind of nervous focus that came before a storm. Her old sedan hummed along the mountain road, the windows cracked open to let in air sharp with pine and morning frost. Every curve brought her closer to the range she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. 8 years since she'd shouldered a rifle. 8 years since she'd trusted herself enough to aim at anything that mattered. When she pulled up to the gate, a figure was waiting, tall, lean, older. He stood like a man who'd spent his life in disciplined lines. Frank DeMarco, former Marine, owner of Copper Ridge, and one of the last people left who remembered what she used to be. "Maya Hartwell," he said, smiling beneath weathered eyes. "Thought maybe you'd quit shooting for good." "I did," she said, stepping out. "Apparently I'm bad at quitting." Frank laughed softly, but there was respect in it. "Brooks told me what's going on. Sounds like you're stepping back into a fire." "That's one way to put it." He gestured toward the sprawling complex behind him, berms stretching into distance, wind flags snapping under pale light. "Range is yours until the public shows up. I've got targets at 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, and out to 1,500 meters. Let's see what 8 years off does to a person." Inside the equipment shed, the air smelled of oil and cold steel. Frank moved with easy precision, pulling an older Remington 700 from the rack, wood stock, .308 caliber, clean lines, dependable. "You remember this one?" he asked. "She's got no fancy computers, just you, the glass, and gravity." Maya took the rifle slowly, hands trembling just a fraction. The metal was cold against her palm, familiar as a ghost's handshake. She checked the chamber, adjusted the scope, and looked through the glass, that old habit sliding back like muscle memory waking from sleep. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed that silence inside the sight picture, the kind that erased everything except distance, wind, and intent. "You're thinking too much," Frank said gently. "Just breathe." She did, and the first shot broke 8 years of silence. The recoil hit like a confession, sharp, real, honest. She felt it in her bones. The bullet struck 4 inches right. Frank, watching through his spotting scope, grunted. "Not bad for a ghost. Try again." The second shot drifted closer. The third found near center. By the fifth, she could taste it, the old rhythm, faint but alive. Yet something inside her trembled. Every trigger squeeze came with the echo of Webb's voice, of the boardroom hearing, of the humiliation she'd buried so deep it still ached. Frank caught it instantly. "You're fighting ghosts," he said, "not wind." Maya looked away, ashamed. "I'm out of practice." "You're out of trust," he corrected, "with yourself." They shot for 3 hours under the climbing sun. Her groups tightened. Her breathing steadied. But when she packed up, she still felt like an imposter wearing her own past. Back at the store that afternoon, the world looked painfully normal. Customers buying filters, spark plugs, the smell of burnt coffee from Roger's office. She almost convinced herself that the morning had been a dream. Until the bell above the door chimed again. Sergeant Brooks walked in, not alone this time. The man beside him carried himself differently, heavier, older, the quiet authority of someone used to command. "Miss Hartwell," he said, offering a hand. "Master Sergeant Kevin Rhodes. I trained snipers at Fort Bridger." Maya shook his hand, wary. "And you're here because—" "Because Brooks told me you're trying to do the impossible in 3 weeks," Rhodes said. "And I don't believe in impossible." Brooks crossed his arms. "He's volunteering off the record. If Webb finds out, it'll cost him his career." "Let him try," Rhodes said. "The man's owed a reckoning for a long time." Maya stiffened at the sound of that name. "You know Webb?" Rhodes nodded. "I was at Fort Campbell, saw what he did to you. You filed a fraud report, didn't you? Procurement kickbacks. He buried you instead of the evidence." Maya's throat tightened. "You don't need to." "I do," Rhodes interrupted, voice low and hard. "Because you need to understand something. What happened to you wasn't failure. It was punishment for integrity. Don't let him take your aim again." The words hit harder than recoil. For 8 years she'd carried guilt like a weapon turned inward. Hearing someone name it truth, not weakness, left her disoriented. Brooks cleared his throat. "We'll meet at Copper Ridge tomorrow. Rhodes will run drills. You'll hate him by noon." "Good," Rhodes said dryly. "Means we're getting somewhere." When they left, Roger stepped out from his office, coffee mug in hand. That sounded serious. "It is," Maya said. "You're really doing this then?" he asked. "For the fundraiser?" She hesitated, looking at the counter, at her hands, at the dull shine of her wedding band scar, the one left by a life she never got to finish. "I'm doing it because someone has to." Roger smiled softly. Maybe that someone's been waiting to come back. The next morning, the world narrowed to a trigger and a voice. "Hold that breath," Rhodes barked. Wait now." The shot cracked through thin air. Dust plumed on the berm, half an inch off center. "Closer," he said. "But you're still thinking like a mechanic, not a sniper." They trained for hours. He stripped her back to fundamentals: body alignment, trigger reset, wind calls. Every correction felt like penance. Every hit a step closer to the version of herself she'd lost. "Trust what you see," Rhodes said, watching her through binoculars. "You've spent years doubting your own judgment. Webb did that to you. Every time you defer to someone else's voice, he wins again." By midday, her shoulder ached, sweat stinging her eyes. She fired one last round at 800 meters. The bullet carved a clean hole dead center. Rhodes smiled. "There she is." Maya looked up from the scope, startled. "Who?" "The shooter who used to know exactly who she was." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. That evening, home smelled of stew and rain. Her mother was sitting at the kitchen table with Gloria Martinez, their 70-year-old neighbor, an unrelenting force of nature. The table was covered in papers, donation forms, seating charts, volunteer rosters. "Maya, perfect timing," Gloria said. "We need someone who can plan like a general." "I left that behind," Maya said softly. Gloria gave her a look that said she didn't believe that for a second. "Good. Then you'll know how to run an event." They talked logistics for an hour. Parking, crowd control, safety zones. Maya's old instincts clicked back on. Identify requirements, allocate resources, build contingencies, the language of survival now repurposed for hope. When the planning session ended, Gloria packed up her notes and left with her usual hurricane of enthusiasm. Elena stayed behind, watching her daughter quietly. "You've been different lately," she said, "more alive." Maya smiled weakly. "Alive's expensive." Her mother reached out, her trembling hand covering Maya's. "You've been hiding for 8 years. Whatever happens with this competition, don't hide anymore." Maya wanted to argue, but the tremor in her mother's voice silenced her. For the first time, she realized how much fear had cost them both, not just careers or comfort, but pride, dignity. Later, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling while rain tapped the window. Brooks's words, Rhodes's lessons, her mother's courage, all collided in her mind until she couldn't tell where fear ended and resolve began. When her phone buzzed, she didn't hesitate. "Brooks," she said quietly. "I'm in," he answered. "Rhodes says you're ready for the next phase." "Am I?" "Doesn't matter," he said. "You said yes, that's what matters." She hung up and stared into the dark. The impossible didn't feel impossible anymore, just terrifying. The next week turned into a blur of training and exhaustion. Rhodes introduced stress drills, running sprints before shooting to simulate combat heart rate, forcing her to breathe through adrenaline, to find calm inside chaos. Her accuracy faltered at first, then sharpened into something fierce and familiar. Each morning she arrived before dawn. Each evening she left bruised, sore, and stronger. And every night she dreamed of Webb, his smirk, his pen scratching signatures on contracts soaked in greed. On the 5th day, Brooks showed up with a teenager in tow. The kid couldn't have been more than 16, tall, eager, a Fort Bridger High School shirt hanging loose on his frame. "This is Tyler Webb," Brooks said. He asked if he could observe. Maya froze. The name hit like a gut punch. "Webb, of course." The boy smiled, oblivious. "Miss Hartwell, I heard you're gonna shoot at the fundraiser. My dad says Captain Voss will make it look easy, but I think you might surprise everyone." Maya forced a polite nod. "Your dad's in the Army." "Yeah, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb. He's the deputy commander at Bridger." The universe laughed somewhere behind her. She felt Rhodes's hand rest lightly on her shoulder, grounding her. "That's a big name to live up to," Maya said carefully. Tyler grinned. "He's the best officer on base, always talks about integrity and honor." The words twisted like a blade. "I'm sure he does," she murmured. Frank intervened, sensing the storm. "Tyler, how about you help me reset targets? Miss Hartwell needs to check wind data." As the boy jogged off, Rhodes muttered under his breath, "That's the sun, huh?" "Yeah," Maya whispered, "that's the sun." "You okay?" She watched the boy's silhouette move against the range light, all youth and faith. He shouldn't pay for his father's sins. Rhodes studied her a long moment. Maybe not, but you don't have to carry them either. That night she went home shaking, caught between fury and pity. Her mother noticed instantly. "What happened?" "I met Webb's son." Alina's eyes softened. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing yet." Alina smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's mercy." 2 days later, the knock came at closing time. A woman stood in the doorway, early 30s, sharp eyes, notebook in hand. "Maya Hartwell, I'm Susan Brooks, David's sister. I'm an investigative journalist." Maya frowned. "You're what now?" Susan stepped inside, lowering her voice. "I'm looking into procurement fraud at Fort Bridger. Your name came up." Maya felt her pulse spike. "I'm not." Susan opened her notebook. "Your discharge records don't add up. 8 years ago, stellar reviews. Then 6 months under Major Marcus Webb, and suddenly, career-ending evaluations. You reported irregularities, didn't you?" Maya said nothing. Susan leaned closer. "He's doing it again. Same scam, different contracts. I have evidence, but I need your story to connect the pattern." The world seemed to tilt. For 8 years she'd lived like none of it mattered anymore. Now the truth was clawing its way back through the cracks. "I kept documentation," Maya admitted quietly. "Emails, procurement specs, reports, all of it." "Can I see it?" "Tomorrow," Maya said. "Library, neutral ground." Susan nodded. "Maya, this could end him, not just his career, his protection." When she left, Maya sat alone in the break room, staring at the wall until the clock's ticking became unbearable. She realized she was no longer training just to shoot. She was preparing to expose the man who'd built his life on destroying others. For the first time in years, fear didn't paralyze her. It clarified her. That night she drove to a storage unit on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like dust and time. She found the old accordion file box buried under winter coats. Inside, copies of emails, contracts, handwritten notes, Webb's handwriting, his initials, his guilt. She pressed her thumb to the cover. "Not this time," she whispered. Then she locked the unit, walked back to her car, and watched the stars burn cold above the mountains, distant, unblinking, patient. In 17 days, she'd face the world again. And this time she wouldn't miss. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive with fanfare or forgiveness. Sometimes it's just the sound of a bullet finding truth. What do you do when truth finally looks back at you? Maya sat in her car outside the Ridgefield Public Library, the box of evidence resting on the passenger seat like an unspoken confession. Rain pattered against the windshield, slow and deliberate, the kind of drizzle that didn't wash things clean, just made them heavier. She hadn't slept. The last few nights had been a blur of training and nightmares, of wind calls and moral equations she couldn't solve. The rifle had become easier to hold than her own guilt. But this was heavier than steel. When she finally stepped inside, the library felt almost sacred. Quiet, dust in pages and the faint hum of old lights. Susan Brooks was already there at the far table, laptop open, phone recorder ready. She looked up, her expression respectful, not like a journalist hungry for a headline, but someone who understood the cost of stories like this. "You sure you want to do this?" Susan asked softly. Maya nodded, setting the box down. "If I don't, someone else pays for my silence." They opened the box together. Inside were printouts of procurement chains, inventory discrepancies, and shipment manifests. Each line a breadcrumb leading to a man who'd built his career on deceit. Susan's eyes widened as she scrolled through scan contracts. He funneled money through third-party vendors under maintenance codes, classic shell operation, but he used your authorization codes for 2 of them, forged signatures. "I know," Maya said quietly. "That's how he pinned it on me." Susan looked up, shocked. "You were court-martialed." Administrative discharge, no trial, no voice. She gave a faint, bitter smile. Webb called it an ethical conflict. I called it survival. Susan nodded slowly. Then let's make sure he doesn't survive this one. By the next afternoon, Susan's report had already been submitted to her editor. The story would take weeks to vet and verify, but the fuse was lit. Maya returned to the range that evening, hoping the wind would clear her mind. Instead, she found Brooks packing near the benches, phone in hand, jaw tight. "What's wrong?" she asked. He looked up, face grave. "Webb knows." She froze. "Knows what?" "That you're talking. Someone leaked the library footage. Military CIDs sniffing around already." Maya's stomach turned to ice. "Susan. She's safe, but Webb's calling in favors. You should lay low until this blows over." She shook her head. "If I hide now, it's over. He wins again." Brooks stepped closer. "He's a colonel with friends in the inspector general's office. He can make you disappear on paper before the weekend." Maya met his gaze, calm but unyielding. "Then let's make sure the world sees me first." The next week became a study in controlled chaos. Rhodes intensified her training. "This isn't about beating a team anymore," he said. "It's about showing truth under pressure." He built new drills, shooting on the move, changing angles, unpredictable targets. If Webb's people show up, they'll be watching for failure. Don't give them any. But under every bullet's echo, Maya could feel the paranoia tightening. A black SUV parked outside her mother's house 2 nights in a row. Anonymous calls with dead air. Once, she found her car door unlocked when she was sure she'd secured it. Brooks offered to post someone nearby, but Maya refused. "No guards, no fear. If they want to scare me, they'll have to look me in the eyes." Alina noticed, of course. She always did. "You're quieter lately," she said one evening over tea. Maya smiled faintly. "That's how I sound when I'm loud inside." Her mother reached across the table, fragile fingers brushing her daughter's wrist. "Whatever you're fighting, don't forget who you're doing it for." Maya nodded. "For the ones who can't fight back." That night she loaded the rifle into its case and drove to Copper Ridge in darkness. She needed solitude, the kind only stars could witness. The range was silent, silver under moonlight. She set up a single target at 1,000 yards. Each breath she took carried a whisper of everything she'd lost and everything she was about to reclaim. Her voice barely audible, she murmured, "For them." The shot cracked through night. The target fell clean. And somewhere fear cracked with it. Days passed. Then one morning, while Maya was reloading magazines at the counter, a man in a dark coat walked in. Civilian clothes, but the bearing of authority. "Miss Hartwell." She looked up. "Yes." He flashed credentials: Department of the Army, Office of the Inspector General. "Special Agent Peters, we'd like to ask you a few questions regarding a federal inquiry into alleged misconduct at Fort Bridger." Her pulse quickened, but her expression didn't change. "Alleged misconduct, that's an interesting phrase." He offered a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Colonel Webb has expressed concern that your recent interactions may have compromised ongoing operations. He's asked that you refrain from participating in any public exhibitions until we conclude our review." "Meaning," Maya said, "he wants me silent again." The agent didn't flinch. "Meaning it would be in your best interest." She studied him for a long moment. "You know what interests me, Agent Peters? Watching men like Webb squirm when integrity finally grows teeth." He sighed, closing his notebook. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "I usually do," she said and walked away. When the door closed behind him, her knees almost buckled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The ghosts were moving faster now, circling, but so was she. By the following weekend, the fundraiser was less than 10 days away. Posters hung in shop windows across Ridgefield. SD Joseph's VETRANS benefit Live Army demonstration. Maya's name wasn't on them. But whispers were. The whole town had heard about the woman who could outshoot the army. Some called it pride, others defiance. To Maya, it was just unfinished business. At the range, Brooks approached her after a brutal morning session. "Press wants interviews. You want to stay quiet or—" "Let them talk," she said. "Silence doesn't protect me anymore." Rhodes chuckled. "That's progress." "Feels more like surrender," Maya replied, "to who I really am." That night she and Brooks sat on the hood of his truck, watching sunset spill over the peaks. The silence between them wasn't empty, it hummed with unspoken truths. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly, serving. She thought about it, the faces she'd lost, the things she'd done right, and the one thing she hadn't, staying down. "I regret letting them take my voice," she said, "but I don't regret learning how to aim." Brooks smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what this is, you taking it back." She looked at him, eyes catching the last light. "You ever get tired of saving people who don't know they're drowning?" "Every damn day," he said, "but sometimes one of them swims." She laughed softly. "Let's hope I can still swim." 2 nights later, Susan called from D.C. Her voice was breathless. "Maya, it's moving. The Oversight Committee just opened an inquiry into Webb's contracts. Someone leaked my early draft." Maya froze. "You?" "No, it came from inside the Pentagon. He's losing cover fast, but he's furious. If he can't stop the story, he'll try to discredit you before the event." "How?" "Rumors, leaks, maybe even your old discharge file." Maya sighed. "Then let him. Truth doesn't need my permission to surface." Susan's tone softened. "You sound calm." "I'm tired," Maya said, "but not afraid." After the call, she stood by the window, watching headlights pass on the distant highway. Every one of them reminded her how many lives move past without knowing what courage looks like when no one's watching. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes it's just keeping your hands steady when the world shakes." The next morning, Frank pulled her aside. "Got something for you," he said, handing her a rifle case she didn't recognize. Inside was a rebuilt Remington 700, polished, balanced, flawless. "I thought we were using the defective scopes," she said. "You are," Frank replied, "but I figured you deserved a weapon that won't fight you every inch of the way." She smiled faintly. "You always did believe in second chances." He grinned. "Not second chances, true aim." As she set up at the firing line, she felt the world narrow again, her breath sinking with the wind, the trigger, the earth's slow heartbeat. The rifle became an extension of everything she'd once been, and everything she refused to forget. When the last round fired, Rhodes called out, "That's 150 hits straight. You're ready." She exhaled, letting the barrel's heat fade into air. "Ready?" A big word. He smiled. "So's redemption." That night Maya stopped by her mother's bedside. Elena was asleep, the soft rhythm of her breathing filling the room. On the dresser sat an old photograph, Maya in uniform, her mother beaming beside her, both unaware of what years would take. She whispered, "I'm doing this for you, for everyone who ever believed silence was safety." Outside, thunder rolled low across the valley, a storm building for the fundraiser, for the reckoning. And somewhere far away, Marcus Webb sat in his office at Fort Bridger, staring at a laptop screen showing Susan Brooks's published teaser. Fraud, Silence, and a Soldier's Redemption, the Maya Hartwell story. His jaw tightened. "So it's war then," he muttered. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. When the voice on the other end answered, he said, "I need that demonstration shut down, whatever it takes." Back in Ridgefield, the wind began to rise. And Maya, staring out into the dark from her porch, could almost feel it, that electric quiet that comes before impact. She didn't know exactly what was coming. only that she wouldn't run this time. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it rides the wind through a rifle's breath, silent, steady, unerring. What happens when silence turns into a weapon? The morning of the demonstration began with fog thick, unmoving, a pale blanket over Copper Ridge. The mountains looked ghostly, half-formed, like the world hadn't decided whether to show up yet. Maya stood at the range gate, rifle case in hand, pulse steady but deep. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of wet soil and anticipation. She'd woken before dawn, not from nerves but from clarity. It wasn't about winning anymore. It wasn't even about proving herself. This was about truth finding a voice, hers. By 7:30, the parking lot was filling with people. Families, veterans, local reporters, even kids wearing army caps too big for their heads. St. Joseph's volunteers were setting up tables with coffee and donuts. Hand-painted signs read, "Support our veterans. Save the center." Somewhere behind all the small-town warmth, Maya could feel the eyes, Webb's people, plainclothes, pretending to blend in. She recognized their stance, their stillness. Trained observers never quite knew how to act like civilians. Rhodes arrived first, his voice cutting through the morning haze. "Looks like we got a full house." "Yeah," she said, scanning the crowd. "Feels more like a firing squad." Brooks joined them, clipboard in hand. "Press is here. County commissioner, too. Even got a few brass from Bridger." "Webb?" Maya asked. Brooks shook his head. "Not in person, but someone's here in his place, Captain Voss, his protege." Maya exhaled slowly. Of course he sent a shadow. Rhodes leaned close. "You just focus on what you do best. The rest will sort itself out." But she wasn't sure it would. The fog wasn't just weather, it was omen. The opening ceremony began with applause and speeches. Reverend Grant spoke first, his words simple but strong. "We're here because no one heals alone." His voice carried through the valley, humble and hopeful. Then Captain Voss took the mic, square-jawed, perfectly pressed uniform, the kind of man who thought integrity was a performance. He smiled too easily. "It's an honor to represent Fort Bridger today," he said. "We believe in teamwork, precision, and dedication to the mission." Maya watched him, arms crossed. Every syllable reeked of Webb's mentorship, polished, political, hollow. When the announcer called her name, the crowd murmured. "Civilian participant Maya Hartwell." No title, no rank, just a name. She stepped forward, feeling the gravel shift under her boots. For a heartbeat, she was 28 again, uniformed, proud, not yet broken. Then the wind caught her hair and she remembered where she really stood. Beside the firing platform, Captain Voss offered a handshake that was more challenge than greeting. "We're using issued gear," he said, gesturing to the table of rifles. "Standard optics, no personal adjustments." "I wouldn't have it any other way," she replied. He smirked. "Hope your civilian hobbies kept your aim sharp." Maya said nothing, just opened her case and began her ritual: gloves, cheek rest, scope alignment. The crowd watched, cameras clicking. The fog thickened, curling low around the targets. Rhodes crouched beside her, wind shifting from southwest. "You've got about 5 seconds between gusts." She nodded, eyes narrowing through the glass. The first stage began. Voss's team fired first, 4 soldiers, moving in perfect sequence. Their shots cracked through the valley, distant metal clanging as half their rounds struck home. Applause followed. Then silence, her turn. Maya inhaled. The world shrank to a circle of glass, a thread of wind, a heartbeat. The first shot cut through fog like it was nothing. The metallic ping came half a second later, dead center. The second. The third. By the 5th, people were whispering. By the 10th, they were holding their breath. Rhodes whispered, "You're making them believers." She didn't answer. She wasn't shooting to impress. She was shooting to remember who she'd been, what they'd taken, and what she refused to surrender. Halfway through, something shifted. The next bullet veered an inch wide. Then two. Her scope image flickered subtle but wrong. She adjusted focus, tried again. The reticle ghosted, drifting with each breath. Sabotage. She blinked hard, heart pounding. Webb's hand, even from miles away. They'd tampered with her optic. Brooks' voice crackled in her ear through the earpiece. Maya, you've got interference. Swap rifles. No, she said. They want that panic on camera. She closed her eyes, exhaled. Old instincts took over. She switched to iron sights, fingers steady on muscle memory alone. Rhodes's whisper came through, disbelieving. You're not. I am, she said. The next round struck clean, then another, and another. The crowd gasped. Even Voss turned, expression cracking. The woman shooting with a sabotaged rifle was outscoring the army team. For a few seconds, the valley was nothing but echoes and awe. Then the final target appeared, 1,500 meters, near invisible in fog. She steadied, counting heartbeats. 3, 2, 1. She squeezed. The silence that followed was eternal. Then a faint ping, clear as glass breaking. The crowd erupted. Veterans cheered, reporters shouted, children waved flags, but Maya barely heard them. She just lowered the rifle, exhaling through trembling lips. Rhodes grabbed her shoulder. 150 targets straight, you did it. Brooks grinned wide. You just made history, Hartwell. But Maya's eyes weren't on them. They were on the back of the crowd, a man in a dark coat, watching. Even through the fog, she knew the posture. Marcus Webb. He didn't clap, he didn't move, just turned and disappeared into the mist. Hours later, as the crowd dispersed and the sun broke through the fog, Maya sat alone on the range bench, rifle beside her. The quiet felt earned this time, heavy but clean. Rhodes joined her, holding 2 coffees. You realize what you did out there, right? I shot targets, she said simply. He shook his head. No, you shot the lie. Brooks approached, phone in hand. Susan just called. The full exposé's live. Your footage from today's event is everywhere. Webb can't hide now. Maya didn't smile. Relief wasn't what she felt. It was something deeper, release. What happens now? She asked. Investigation, fallout, maybe justice, Brooks said. But for once it won't happen in the dark. She nodded, good. Rhodes looked at her, eyes soft. You know, you didn't just save St. Joseph's today. You saved every soldier who ever got silenced for telling the truth. Maya stared at the mountains, vast, eternal. I didn't save anyone, she said quietly. I just stopped running. That night the benefit reached record donations. The Veterans Center was safe. News vans crowded Ridgefield's small streets, reporters shouting questions she refused to answer. She didn't want fame, just peace. When she got home, Elena was waiting by the window, eyes shining with pride. You did it, her mother whispered. Maya knelt beside her chair. We did it. Elena took her hand, frail fingers tracing old scars. I told you, you weren't finished yet. Maya smiled, tired, small, real. Maybe now I am. Outside, fireworks from the celebration painted the sky red and gold. But Maya barely looked. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, the same one where Webb had vanished. Because she knew this wasn't over. 2 days later, a letter arrived, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. Her at the range, rifle raised, the fog behind her. On the back, written in a hand she knew too well. You may have won the crowd, but this isn't finished. M.W. Maya stared at the note for a long time, then set it in the fireplace. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. As the flames died, she whispered, then we'll finish it your way. Sometimes victory isn't loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to face what comes next, without fear, without apology. And as the smoke rose into the night, Maya Hartwell finally understood. Dignity doesn't shout. It endures. What happens when justice starts to turn its aim? It began 3 mornings after the fundraiser, the silence breaking not with triumph, but accusation. Maya woke to the sound of a phone vibrating across her nightstand. The number was unknown, but the tone that followed was unmistakable, official, rehearsed, cold. "Miss Hartwell," the voice said, "this is Colonel Yates, Office of the Inspector General. You've been named in a formal inquiry related to the Fort Bridger procurement investigation." She sat up, heart kicking once then twice. "Named how?" "As a cooperating witness," he said, then paused. "And as a possible beneficiary of falsified reimbursement claims submitted under your name." The room tilted. "What?" "The inquiry's expanding," Yates continued. "Until further notice, please remain available for questioning. Avoid public appearances." When the call ended, she stared at the wall, blank, white, unreal. Webb wasn't just retaliating. He was rewriting the truth in real time. She dialed Brooks, straight to voicemail, then Rhodes, then Susan. Finally, Brooks picked up. "They're coming after you," he said, his voice tense. "Webb, using the audit trail you gave Susan. He's framing you with your own evidence." "How?" she asked. "He claims you fabricated the documents to cover a personal payout. He's got signatures, time stamps, even a fake witness statement from one of his men." Maya laughed once, dry, exhausted. "He's good, I'll give him that." Brooks lowered his voice. "Stay calm. Susan's talking to her legal team. Rhodes is already driving in from Bridger. We'll fix this." But deep down, she knew this wasn't about fixing. It was about surviving the second strike. By noon, the media storm hit. Cable networks ran the headline, "Whistleblower or fraudster? Questions emerge around civilian snipers' motives." Pundits debated ethics between commercial breaks. Anonymous sources whispered about disgraced ex-soldiers. Her inbox filled with hate and pity in equal measure. At the auto shop, Roger stood in the doorway, bewildered. "Maya, tell me this isn't true." "It's not," she said, but even she heard how hollow it sounded. Truth, once twisted, rarely straightened easily. He tried to smile, to believe. "You've got friends in your corner." "I've got targets on my back," she said quietly. Outside, customers pointed. Phones lifted. The town that had cheered her 3 days ago now watched like spectators at a slow collapse. That night she parked her car at the edge of Ridgefield, where cell service dropped out and silence lived unbothered. She sat under the stars, the same stars she'd aimed beneath, and asked herself the question no one else would. What if he wins again? The answer came in her mother's voice, imagined, steady. "Then you fight again, Maya. You don't stop just because the storm came back." The next day, Rhodes arrived, storm in his eyes. "They've issued a summons," he said, throwing a folder onto the table. "Internal affairs. Webb's got a preliminary statement signed by Voss and 2 witnesses claiming you forged inventory logs." She flipped through the pages, her own name scrawled across doctored forms, digital signatures spliced together from old reports. "They used my 2017 submissions," she said, breath catching. "He's been saving this." "Insurance," Rhodes growled. "He's been building a trap for years." Susan joined them later that evening, laptop glowing in the dim motel light. "I'm still digging. The timestamps Webb submitted don't align with Fort Bridger's server activity. If we can prove metadata tampering, we can flip this." Maya leaned back, weary. "How long?" "Days, maybe weeks." "We don't have weeks," Rhodes said. "Webb's got momentum. Once perception sets in, it's over." Susan looked at Maya, her expression soft but unflinching. "Then we need to give them a counterstory. You said you had recordings." Maya nodded slowly. "From back then, audio of a procurement briefing, Webb pushing me to approve faulty optics. I kept it, buried it in a drive I swore I'd never touch again." Susan leaned forward. "Where?" "Storage unit, same one with the documents." Rhodes stood. "Let's go." The unit smelled of dust and gasoline, the air heavy with the scent of waiting things. Maya found the drive exactly where she'd left it, taped behind the fuse box, old but intact. She plugged it into Susan's laptop. The screen filled with static hiss, then a voice. "Webb's. You'll sign it, Sergeant. The manufacturer's cleared through my office. Don't make this complicated." Her younger voice, brittle but defiant. "Sir, the specs fail durability under recoil. It's fraud." A pause, then Webb again, colder. "Then consider this your final warning." Rhodes exhaled. There it is. But the relief was short-lived. A text lit up on Susan's phone from an unknown number. "Nice trick, but that file won't save her." Attached was a photo, taken moments ago, of Maya's car parked outside. They weren't alone. Rhodes killed the lights. "Grab what you need, we're leaving." Outside, the night was too still. The lot empty, but the silence thick enough to hum. As they reached the truck, a sound cracked through the dark, the distant pop of a gunshot. Then another. Rhodes shoved Maya down. "Go, move." They ducked behind the vehicle, gravel biting into their palms. Shadows shifted near the fence line, two figures, moving with trained precision. "Webb's men," Rhodes whispered. "He's escalating." Maya's hands shook not from fear but fury. He wasn't content to smear her. He wanted to erase her. When headlights swept across the lot, the attackers vanished into the brush. By the time the sheriff arrived, there was nothing but silence and shell casings. No proof, no trail, just another ghost story no one would believe. The next morning, Maya sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. Elena looked at her with quiet knowing. "You're scared," her mother said. "I'm tired," Maya replied. "Every time I tell the truth, it costs more." Elena smiled sadly, "Then charge more." It was absurd and perfect. Maya laughed for the first time in days, the sound brittle but alive. Her mother reached out, thumb tracing the edge of her palm. "You can't control what they say, only what you do next." "What I do next," Maya murmured, "might break me." "Then let it. Maybe that's how we shed the parts that never belonged." That night Susan's story went live, not the full exposé, but a rebuttal piece titled "The Evidence They Don't Want You to Hear." It featured a minute of the audio file, Webb's voice undeniable. Within hours it spread. The narrative began to shift. Public opinion cracked. Lawmakers demanded an independent review. The same networks that crucified Maya now replayed the tape in disbelief. But Webb wasn't finished. The following morning, a military convoy rolled into Ridgefield. 3 unmarked SUVs, 2 sedans, one purpose. They knocked on Maya's door at 6:17 a.m. sharp. "Miss Hartwell," the lead agent said, "you're under temporary detainment pending verification of classified materials unlawfully disclosed to civilian media." Her mother tried to intervene, voice trembling. "You can't just—" Maya stopped her gently. "It's okay, Mom." They cuffed her hands, cold steel biting into skin already raw from recoil and regret. As they led her outside, neighbors peeked through blinds. Phones filmed. Somewhere, a child's voice asked, "Is that the lady who hit all the targets?" She didn't look away, didn't hang her head. Because this was the cost of speaking loud enough to be heard. In the holding cell, time slowed. Concrete walls, buzzing light, the faint hum of distant voices. Then footsteps, Webb. He stood outside the bars, immaculate as ever, confidence radiating like cologne. "You never learn, do you, Maya?" She stared at him, calm, cold. "You should have stayed in the fog." He smirked. "You're not the first idealist I've had to clean up after. The army survives on people like me. Realists." "You mean liars," she said. He ignored it. "You'll be released soon, of course. We'll make it look like a misunderstanding. But by then, your credibility's gone. You'll disappear again. That's mercy, Maya. Take it." She stepped forward, hands gripping the bars. "You think silence is mercy. It's not, it's rot." For the first time, his composure faltered, just slightly. Then he turned and walked away. As the door slammed behind him, Maya closed her eyes and whispered to the empty air, "Not this time." Hours later, the cell door opened. Rhodes was waiting, bruised but smiling. "Charges dropped. Oversight committee intervened. You're free." "How?" she asked. He held up Susan's phone. "Because the rest of the recording went public. Every word. Webb's done." Maya exhaled, shaking. "So that's it." "Not yet," Rhodes said. "There's still the hearing, but the world's finally listening." She stepped outside into the daylight, blinking at the freedom she'd nearly forgotten how to feel. The air tasted new, clean. Elena was waiting across the parking lot, tears glinting. Maya ran to her, arms closing around the woman who'd never stopped believing. "Welcome home," her mother whispered. And as the sun broke over Ridgefield, Maya realized something deeper than victory. Justice wasn't a single moment. It was the endurance to stand there until the truth stopped shaking. Sometimes redemption isn't about being believed. It's about refusing to vanish again. What if freedom comes dressed as another fight? The afternoon sun was merciless when Maya walked out of the federal building, the light almost blinding after days under concrete and fluorescent bulbs. Her wrists were free, but the marks from the cuffs hadn't faded. Neither had the memory of Webb's smirk behind those bars. Reporters swarmed her instantly, microphones flashing like bayonets. "Miss Hartwell, do you have any comment on the allegations? Are you cooperating with military prosecutors? Do you regret leaking classified material?" Maya didn't flinch, she just kept walking. Rhodes and Susan flanked her like shields. Brooks stood by the curb with a car running, scanning the crowd. It was chaos: journalists, protesters, even veterans waving hand-painted signs that read, "She told the truth." When she finally reached the car, the noise dimmed behind the slammed door. For the first time in days, there was silence, fragile like glass. "Where to?" Brooks asked. "Home," she said. "I need to see my mother." Elena was waiting on the porch, blanket around her shoulders, the newspaper spread across her lap. Maya froze when she saw the front page, a photo of herself, mid-step, hair windblown, headline screaming, "Sniper turned WHISTLEBLOWERWALKS free, the woman who won't back down." Her mother smiled softly. "They finally used your name right." Maya sat beside her, exhaustion settling deep. "Feels strange being seen." Elena handed her a cup of tea. "You were always seen, you just stopped looking back." For a moment, Maya didn't answer. She just listened to wind in the trees, to the slow creak of the porch, to her mother's quiet breathing. The world had slowed down again, but peace never lasted long around truth. That night her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Testimony scheduled, 900, Senate hearing room 4B. No sender, no signature, but she knew exactly who it was, from the Oversight Committee. Rhodes called seconds later. "They're making it official. You'll testify before Congress next week." "On record." "On camera," he said, "nationwide." Maya exhaled slowly, then let them hear it. In the days leading up to the hearing, Maya's life became a storm of rehearsals and nerves. Susan walked her through legal phrasing and timing. Brooks handled logistics. Rhodes stayed in the background, eyes on everything that could go wrong. "You'll be under oath," Susan reminded her. "Webb, lawyers will try to provoke you. Stay calm, factual, don't give them emotion they can twist." Maya nodded, but calm was never her problem. It was rage, the quiet kind that came from 8 years of watching liars thrive. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window with her mother's old scarf draped around her shoulders, looking out at the moonlit yard. Every sound carried memory: rifle bolts, radio static, Webb's voice saying, "Don't make this complicated." She whispered to herself, "No more silence." and when dawn finally broke, she was ready. The hearing room felt colder than the jail cell had. Cameras lined the walls, red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Rows of senators faced her from an elevated dais, their expressions unreadable. Behind her sat journalists, veterans, civilians, a gallery of expectation. When the clerk swore her in, her voice didn't shake. "I do." Webb sat across the room, flanked by attorneys, his uniform pressed, his medals gleaming under harsh light. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His silence was its own weapon, one he'd used masterfully for years. The questioning began gently, procedural, almost polite. Then came the sting. "Miss Hartwell," a senator said, leaning forward, "why now? Why speak after 8 years?" She met his gaze. "Because silence started killing more people than truth." Another asked, "Do you have proof that Colonel Webb knowingly falsified records?" She nodded once. "Yes, audio recordings, digital correspondence, and 3 corroborating witnesses. One of them sits behind me right now." Every camera turned as Sergeant Brooks rose from the gallery and took a seat beside her. The room murmured. Webb's composure cracked, a flicker, but real. The senators pressed harder. "Miss Hartwell, did you personally profit from these actions?" "No," she said firmly. "I lost everything. My rank, my career, my home. I didn't come here for profit. I came because truth shouldn't depend on convenience." The audience went silent. When Webb was called to respond, he smiled that same calculated smile. "With all due respect, Senator, this woman has a history of insubordination and psychological instability. Her so-called evidence is inadmissible. She's a disgruntled ex-soldier seeking relevance." Maya didn't move. She just waited still, unblinking. Susan's team queued up the recording on the screen. Webb's own voice filled the room. "You'll sign it, Sergeant. The manufacturer's cleared through my office. Don't make this complicated." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Webb's attorney lunged for the pause button, but it was too late. The truth was already echoing through history. Maya leaned forward, her tone steady but razor-sharp. "That's not instability, Colonel. That's your voice." For the first time, Webb looked at her. No mask, no polish, just fury, raw, cornered human. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the time it ended, the air felt scorched with revelation. Reporters swarmed outside the building, cameras flashing like lightning. Maya didn't stop for questions. She just walked past the crowds, down the marble steps into open sunlight. Rhodes caught up with her halfway down. "They're recommending a full investigation. Webb's suspended pending review." She nodded, not smiling. "It won't bring back the years, but it's something." "It's more than something," Rhodes said quietly. "It's the shot that finally hit." That evening, back in Ridgefield, the sunset bled across the valley in deep golds and soft red. Maya sat on the back porch with her mother, the newspaper headline glowing faintly on the table between them. "Whistleblower redeems the uniform." Alina squeezed her hand. "You did it." Maya shook her head. "We did it." Her mother smiled faintly. "And what now?" Maya thought about it, the empty rifle case under her bed, the ghosts finally quiet. "Now I teach people how to see wind," she said. "How to steady their hands when everything moves." Alina laughed softly. "Still a sniper then?" "Always," Maya replied, "just aiming at different targets." They sat in silence as the sun sank behind the mountains. The world felt lighter, not perfect but earned. And when the first stars began to appear, Maya whispered to the horizon, not to Webb, not to the army, but to herself. "Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it just endures, and then it fires once more, not in anger but in peace." The night answered with quiet wind through pine. And for the first time in 8 years, Maya Hartwell finally felt what victory truly meant. Not the applause, not the vindication, but the stillness after the storm, when the truth no longer trembles. What does courage look like when the noise fades? It had been 3 months since the hearings ended, and Ridgefield had returned to its old rhythm: slow mornings, quiet streets, the scent of pine and diesel mixing in the crisp mountain air. But for Maya, time no longer moved the way it used to. She still woke before dawn, out of habit, still listened for the sound of wind shifting direction, the way she used to read a target's breath. Only now her battlefield wasn't made of dust and steel. It was made of classrooms, notebooks, and the careful attention of young soldiers learning from someone who'd already lost everything once. "Don't chase perfection," she told them, voice steady, calm. "Chase consistency. Perfection dies the moment the wind changes." The students, mostly young women, a few men, veterans and recruits alike, listened in silence. There was something magnetic about the way she taught, like every word carried the weight of something she'd already paid for in full. They called her Coach Hartwell now. The range at Copper Ridge had been converted into a training and therapy program, part marksmanship, part rehabilitation, funded through St. Joseph's and private donors. She hadn't asked for it. The community built it for her. And every time she stood at the line, guiding someone, trembling hands around a rifle stock, she found herself whispering the same words Frank once told her: "Trust what you see." One evening, while cleaning rifles after class, Maya heard footsteps behind her. She didn't look up, she knew that gait. "Rhodes, you got mail," he said, holding a small brown envelope. No return address, just her name in neat, deliberate handwriting. She took it, slicing the seal open carefully. Inside was a single-page, official letterhead from the Department of Defense. Notification of termination, Colonel Marcus A. Webb. Dishonorable discharge, court-martial pending. She read it twice slowly. The words didn't bring triumph, just stillness. Rhodes watched her. "It's over, Maya, he's done." She folded the paper once, twice, and tucked it into her jacket pocket. "No, it's just quiet." He nodded, understanding. Quiet's still victory. They stepped outside into the fading light. The range was empty, the sun bleeding gold across the sky. "You ever think about leaving this behind?" Rhodes asked. "I did," she said. "Then I realized this is the part worth keeping." Weeks later, Susan visited, camera crew in tow. "The documentary's airing next month," she said. "We're calling it The Shot That Spoke. You don't have to be on camera if you don't want to." Maya smiled faintly. "I've had enough cameras for a lifetime." Susan hesitated, then placed a small recorder on the table. "Then maybe just your voice. Say whatever you want. No scripts, no edits." Maya thought for a moment, then pressed the record button. The light blinked red. Her voice came out quiet, almost like a confession. "For a long time I thought silence protected me, but silence only ever protected the people who wanted me quiet. I lost years trying to be small enough to stay safe. Turns out, truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to survive." She stopped the recorder, eyes distant. "That's all." Susan smiled softly. "That's everything." The documentary aired 1 month later. It didn't glorify her. It didn't make her a hero. It just told the truth about corruption, endurance, and a woman who refused to disappear. The final scene showed her on the range, guiding a young recruit's hands, teaching her how to find the still point between heartbeat and trigger. The narrator's voice, Maya's, lingered in the background. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. When the credits rolled, veterans across the country sent messages. Some just said thank you, others said, "I'm not hiding anymore." It was enough. Late that autumn, Copper Ridge lay blanketed in frost. The Veterans Center thrived, rebuilt, expanded, full of laughter and the kind of quiet that heals. Maya stood at the range's edge, gloved hands around a thermos, watching the morning light stretch over the valley. A truck pulled up behind her. Brooks stepped out, a familiar grin beneath his breath cloud. "You still up before the sun, huh?" "Old habits," she said. He handed her an envelope, sealed, official but lighter somehow. "Thought you'd want to see this." Inside was a commendation, Civilian Medal of Service, awarded for acts of integrity and courage in defense of the truth. Maya chuckled softly. I didn't do it for medals. Brooks nodded. That's why you deserve one. They stood there a while in silence, wind brushing snow off the targets, the faint crack of someone's distant shot echoing across the range. Maya lifted her eyes toward the horizon, where fog met sunlight, where every breath felt earned. I used to think hitting the target was everything, she said. Now I think it's knowing why you pulled the trigger. Brooks smiled. You ever regret it? She looked at him, then past him at the mountains. No, I regret waiting so long to aim again. That evening she sat by her mother's bedside. Alina's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow but peaceful. Maya held her hand gently, tracing the familiar lines of strength that had guided her through every storm. Mom, she whispered, you were right, I wasn't finished. Alina didn't stir, but a small smile curved her lips, as if she'd been waiting to hear that. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, silent, endless. Maya stood by the window, watching it gather on the glass, each flake dissolving into stillness. Somewhere out there, Webb's name was being erased from plaques and records, but she didn't care anymore. The world could handle its own justice. Hers had already come in quieter ways. A young student learning to breathe through fear. A veteran finding peace in the sound of a clean trigger break. Her mother resting without worry. She'd thought redemption was a moment. It turned out to be a life. And as night fell across the mountains, Maya Hartwell whispered to herself, not as a soldier, not as a sniper, not even as a survivor, but as something simpler. Sometimes, you don't borrow a rifle to prove you can shoot. You borrow it to remember who you were before the world forgot. The wind carried her words into the dark, across the range, through the valley that had witnessed her fall and rise again. And in that stillness, she smiled, because some targets once hit never fade. What remains when the echo finally fades? 10 years had passed since Copper Ridge last saw the woman who silenced an army's lie. The range was quieter now, rebuilt, repainted, but still carrying the faint scent of oil and cordite in the cold morning air. Snow rested on the benches, soft and thin like memory itself. A girl stood at the far end, bundled in a faded parka 2 sizes too big. The rifle she held looked enormous in her hands, but her stance, careful, deliberate, carried the unmistakable rhythm of someone who'd been taught to respect what a weapon meant. Beside her stood an older man with graying hair and a smile that had learned to survive hardship. Brooks. Remember what she said? He asked gently. The girl nodded. Trust what you see. Good, and breathe between heartbeats. That's where the truth hides. She took aim. The shot cracked through the stillness, echoing across the frozen hills. When the sound faded, Brooks exhaled, slow, reverent. Perfect, he said softly. Your mom would have smiled at that one. The girl looked up at him, eyes bright. She used to say that too. Brooks smiled. Yeah, she said a lot of things worth remembering. They packed up in silence, the sound of zippers and wind filling the space where ghosts once lived. On the wall of the small training cabin nearby, a plaque caught the morning light. Maya Hartwell Memorial Range, where truth takes aim. Below it, a smaller inscription read, Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Inside the cabin, the fireplace crackled. Photos lined the mantel, Maya in uniform, Maya teaching at the range, Maya and Alina side by side, smiling beneath an American flag that looked both proud and tired. Rhodes was there, older now, Kane leaning against the chair. He warmed his hands by the fire as Brooks poured coffee. She'd hate the attention, Rhodes said. Brooks chuckled. She'd call it unnecessary ceremony. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the wind. For men like them, peace never came easy, but here it felt deserved. After a while, Rhodes spoke again. You ever think she knew how far it would go? The program, the reforms, all of it. Brooks shook his head. I don't think she cared how far, she just wanted it to start. That afternoon, as the snow eased, a group of new recruits arrived, part of the Hartwell Foundation's mentorship program. Young, nervous, unsure of where conviction met courage. Brooks greeted them with a calm smile. You're here because someone decided silence wasn't good enough, he told them. You're not just learning how to shoot, you're learning how to stand. One recruit raised a tentative hand. Sir, did you know her personally? Brooks paused, eyes softening. Yeah, he said. She saved more people than she'll ever know, not by fighting, by reminding us what fighting should mean. He gestured to the range. That's her story, now make it yours. The group nodded, and one by one they took their places at the line. The valley filled again with the sound Maya loved most, not gunfire but focus, breath, control. Later, as the sky blushed with sunset, Brooks walked alone to the ridge overlooking the valley. He carried a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Inside was Maya's medal, the Civilian Service Award, and a note in her handwriting. If truth has a weight, let it rest where hands stay steady. He set the box beneath the old pine tree that marked her favorite spot, the place where she'd once said goodbye to fear. The wind rose, cold and clean, carrying the faint sound of distant laughter from the training field. Rest easy, Hartwell, Brooks murmured. They learned. He turned to leave, but before he did, he looked back one last time at the valley, the sky, the quiet. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw her there, kneeling in the snow, adjusting a rifle she no longer needed. The wind shifted and she was gone. Years later, when people spoke her name, they didn't talk about scandal or war. They talked about endurance, the kind that doesn't break, even when no one's watching. About a woman who refused to vanish. About the silence she turned into a voice that still echoes in every lesson, every breath, every steady aim that finds its mark. And somewhere, perhaps in that eternal distance where sound meets memory, Maya Hartwell still whispers, hold your breath, find the truth, then let it fly. Because some shots never stop traveling.